And you're very welcome along to the Huddle Breakdown. And we are very triumphant here on the podcast this week as Celtic have once again beaten Rangers. A very, 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 very happy couple of men on the podcast. Alan, no less you, because I mean, although I know James also gets some enjoyment out of Celtic beating Rangers, I do think you in particular out of this podcast, out of the three of us, are probably the one that marvels in the misery the most.
Crikey. Crikey. I was actually genuinely at the end of the game. If I said angry, it I would be far off. I was actually really quite annoyed at how we'd played, especially the second half of the second half. To have had a penalty for 3-1 and then not to have gone on and scored, 4-5, it was hugely frustrating. Now, on the other hand, there is a bit that sort of says, Celtic do that, and then the players are a bit complacent for the cup final, and maybe this keeps them on their toes, knowing that it was a bit hairy, not massively so, but it was untidy. It was untidy. It was another example of not seeing the game out in a professional way, I think, and I just found that you know frustrating. Now, when I'd sat down and had a drink and chilled, and then realized that remembered the enormity of it, structurally, strategically, if Celtic win this league, became all happier again. But in terms of the actual performance, which I know we said weeks ago we weren't going to talk about performances anymore, we just had to get across the line, and we just got across the line. I can't help but reflect back on the performance. So yeah, I'm very contented, but at the time, my honest reaction was sort of major annoyance actually at the performance. Some of it, not
Okay,
all of it.
so I actually quite agree with you, because I was annoyed too, and I felt that if this wasn't the last league derby of the season, then um, Brendan Rodgers would have been quite annoyed at that performance. But I genuinely, James, I don't think you can get too annoyed at this point in the season by a performance against Rangers when we know that things happen in these games. We know that chaos happens. We know that things go wrong. We know from previous games that Celtic actually play worse against Rangers the more they are ahead for the longer period of time. So like this seemed par for the course from Celtic against Rangers this year. Probably not the best performance once they went ahead, but then still saw at the game. If you actually watch it back, like Rangers didn't have that many actual chances. It just was nervy for the sake of being nervy.
It falls under the definition of as insanity trope, right? Which is, nothing really changed. It was very kind of to form to the way that these two teams have played this season. Um, there's all of, there's high level important stuff like Alan suggested about the importance of winning the league, the financial resources, and what that might mean um, structurally. But we're kind of still left with all of the other stuff that hasn't really changed, meaning that those were two bad teams. um, and neither team has been very good this season. Um, even with Celtic coming on late in the season with the return of important players, we're still not performing at a level that's you know when you can't play a full 80 minutes, let alone 90, against a decent level opponent without your team basically physically tanking, which has been the particularly in midfield the pattern for most if not all of the season. So yeah, I mean I don't think it's a coincidence that we keep having these issues against Rangers because it's the one domestic opponent that presents the combination of skill, at least a level, right? We're talking about levels here. Skill combined with a level of athleticism, the kind of a scatter plot. And that pushes more stress on our players, and so they're going to tire quicker and run into these issues. And we know that that's been a thing that we've talked about for a long time now. It's just the athletic composition of our team has been of a certain profile for a long time now. So, um, Yeah, not much has changed. We were bigger and, better in the big moments. That's been to pattern. They keep playing John Lundstrom, God love them all, uh, which has been, to pattern. And yeah, so to me, it was kind of as expected, going into the game and coming out of it. Probably the surprise would have been if we would have, you know, beat them 5-1 or something. Um, that would have been something that was different. But the fact that we didn't was is kind of the way this season's been going.
On Lundstrom, Allen, if you run a red light and you smack straight into a car, should you get punished for that, even if you didn't mean to? Your intention was not to smash into the car. Your intention was just to get through the lights as quick as possible. Is that fair enough? Like, it doesn't matter if the people in the car have all been bloodied and broke some limbs. As long as you didn't mean to, then that means then you should be punished. Is that right?
Yeah, the car shouldn't put itself in the way
Exactly. Yeah.
like
The
that. It's just
the car got
ridiculous.
in your way.
So listen, I'm going to do this right because I want to. I said whenever he joined, right, Lundstrom, as the same thing I said with Cantwell. He's one of those that he plays for himself. His contract's winding down. He's checked out. He doesn't care, and you can see that concentration was all over the place. Sometimes he tracked back, sometimes he didn't. He obviously felt, oh, I better do something, so he just threw himself into a challenge on the basis of doing something. And these, this guy was a nightmare in the end for Sheffield United after he played well for 6 months, and he's been pretty poor for them after a good 6 months on their Europa League run. He's just one of these unprofessional kind of players, and see Cantwell, see Raskin. Sure, as I said before, they will end up hating him. They will end up hating them all because of that. Because they're just selfish people that play for themselves. A lot of sportsmen are. But we as fans expect every player to bleed for us on the terraces, and it's not. That's just not real life. So, not a surprise to me. I've seen a lot of Lundstrom over the years. Obviously, he can be quite effective. He can be decent. But yeah, he had a disaster, and I think they've reached the end of the road with them on the other side.
There's something in the thing where Celtic play worse when they're ahead of Rangers, and they definitely seem to play actively worse when Rangers went down to 10 men. Like, Alan or James, do you attribute that to actually them being smarter and bunkering in and looking to counterattack is what suits them better, and that's why they actually play better, or is it Celtic slow things down, get sort of rest on their laurels a little bit when they're 2-0 up, they are 2-1 up, sorry, the team's down to 10 men, so suddenly they have all the possession and they stop playing to an extent.
I want to hear Alan's answer because I don't detect a specific pattern because it's been different.
Yeah,
The whys have
I,
been
I
different. So that's I think is
yeah,
interesting.
I think Celtic lost their way actually when the substitutions were made, and it might be coincidental to an extent because you know the substitutions kind of made sort of sense, or I didn't have a problem with them as such in terms of when James talks about athleticism. It was very obvious at their goal. You sort of looked around and sort of, where's James Forrest gone? Where is he? I can't see him. Why has Alistair Johnson got two players to contend with on that side, allowing a free cross into the box? And then there was other things to pick up on that one as well. But yeah, so him being replaced by a fast player like Kuhn, who I thought did okay. I thought Ralston had a pretty good game when he came on. Defensively, certainly he was very good. And Hattati should probably have been taken off earlier. Maybe come back to that one later. So none of the substitutions were kind of wrong. And Ida for Kyogo, no worries. I mean, I don't think Ida. I think Ida made a lot of bad decisions when he came on, but he certainly kept them honest at the back, and he kept stretching them, and he kept keeping the defense busy. So that was good. So none of the substitutions were kind of bad in that sense, but it just seemed to have a click that you could almost the sort of the change almost happened around the substitutions. Now, whether I think maybe perhaps their substitutions actually had a positive effect. Raskin coming on, um, Roofy didn't really do anything, to be fair. So not so much him. Scott Wright was a little bit more direct. Obviously, Sterling doesn't really give you that as a winger. McCausland again, he doesn't have a lot, but he's busy and he's active and he's a bit more energetic than what they had. So and also just game state and desperation comes into it. They had to win this game, and therefore they had to try and push forward. But as James said, they didn't create anything. I mean, they had a couple of long range shots, and then a few. A couple of moments where the ball's pinging about the box a little bit and awkward clearances, but nothing really. But as to why Celtic, I think there's just a natural game state thing where you just, as the game gets on, and maybe Celtic feel that they have control and they can play a bit more passively. I don't know, but it's it's a bit irritating, and whether we just got tired. It's a hot day, and I don't know, all those things. Probably a combination, but I don't have an insight into it at this
I have to
stage.
chuckle. Every time I hear it's a hot day, and then, again, I can't do Celsius conversions instantaneously, but I see 72 degrees Fahrenheit, and everyone talking about how hot it is. I can't help. I can't help but
Well,
chuckle.
it is.
No, I know it is. It's just that for my entire life, it's always made me laugh.
Start you.
So, what's your
Yeah.
interpretation of it then, James?
I I think it really, because this is not something that's unique to the games against Rangers. I mean, we've had, even against Kilmarnock. I mean, this goes back to, I think, when you've got teams that man mark against us, um, by definition, when you're getting man marked, you're going to have to move more in order to try and create space and to get open, so to speak. Um, Rather than just kind of gliding into space when teams are more zonal, and that just takes more physical effort. And when you've got bigger, stronger players like a Kilmarnock does, or like Rangers do, and they're being physical, they're muscling you, the refereeing is allowing that kind of thing to take place. I mean, you're just going to reach your fatigue threshold faster in those kind of games. And when your profile of players is smaller and not as muscular, um, so to me, that it kind of logically makes sense in those situations. Now, again, strategically, it was to our benefit because guys like Silva can't man mark out wide. I mean, this goes back to one of the, my fears perpetually is that we get the diagnosis coming out of these games that we're miles ahead of them and all this other stuff. And it's, they're likely starting front three were not in the game, right? So I mean, Danilo's out, Cortez is out, and Seema's out, right? Their midfield mess. We keep saying they picked Lundstrom, so there's stuff here that it kind of swings both ways. Just like our center backs were, uh, you know, not present in the New Year's game. So availability of players and that type of thing has a lot to do with it. And it's not like Silva didn't miss a free header at the back post early in the game, and Sterling didn't have, not a free header, but if that's Sema, he probably scores that header because he's taller, he's going to jump higher, right? So there's these situational things. The game was a lot closer until the red card, obviously. Um, it's not like we were dominating them, and then we haven't dominated them this season. I think to argue otherwise is, we've been better in the big moments, and a lot of that's because we've had Kyogo, as I've argued. Um, but it's really been nip and tuck on a fundamental basis. Obviously, we're the better team, um, but the margin's not like crazy. And I think what we, you know, um, what was, I think, reasonably proven is that we have the better manager. Um, and we've been critical at times, and there's always things that you can disagree with. I mean, that's part of being a fan. Um, but his willingness to go back to Forest and to feature Forest, again, in the first 50, 55 minutes of the game, Force was one of the better players on the pitch. He was doing what we needed out of a winger. And same thing with Hatati. He didn't have a great game. Again, that's a tough physical matchup with him. I mean, probably got maybe had a concussion. Who knows? I mean, probably should have been a red card with the blow that he took to the head. Um, but Diamande's a pretty athletic guy, and but he was at least a weapon. He was at least a threat, and we were missing that for a large part of the season. So there's all these factors that on a competitive basis um, play into it. So I think ultimately it's the physicality part of it, and we'll see if recruitment changes that.
Yeah, I think I think part of the reason why people potentially come away from these games thinking that Celtic are miles ahead is that there hasn't been a derby this year where Celtic can say they played well. Like for more than 20 minutes, they've been very much a moments team, and yet they have the much better record in this game. Like Brendan Rodgers knows how to win the derby as well. He knows how to get over the line against them, and that would be my residing feeling is that there's been so many moments within this game, within this rivalry this season, where the odds were thoroughly stacked against Celtic, and they didn't play well, and they didn't perform, and yet they still came away with the result. And maybe that can be attributed to backbone and just being able to take their chances. But I personally do still think that as bad as we have been this year to make the league look tighter than it actually is, if Celtic didn't go on that run where they were missing key players and dropping silly points and not playing to their potential at all, Celtic could probably have won this league by 15, 16 points. So I do think the gap is wider than it might appear on the table, as opposed to where last year it was probably closer than it was on the table.
Yeah, I'd kind of slightly disagree. I think last year we had a much stronger squad, and it actually wasn't as close as it ended up being last season. When you factor in all the other issues, honest mistakes, etc., we won the league pretty easily, to be honest. And I think both teams have kind of gone backwards. They have been more hampered with injuries, but again, that's kind of their own fault. They got rid of most of their sports science department, so that's on them. So you and really, if you look at the spines of the team, they don't have anybody near the level of Carter
Yeah,
Vickers or
I
Luke
mean,
Keogh. They don't have anyone
what I'm saying is
even injured. But but
I
but
don't
but but
disagree with
but it.
that.
Mm,
I'm not saying that we have gotten better since last year or that
mm.
we're not worse since last year. But
Oh
what
God,
I'm
no.
saying is that
Yeah.
as bad as we have gotten this season, they have also gotten much worse. Like
Mm.
they as bad. I've always maintained this, and watching them in Europe, I've noticed it is that as bad as Celtic are, Rangers are most certainly a worse team, and I think that has been pretty obvious.
Yeah, I think it is. In this year, it has been two fairly poor teams by historical comparison, and Celtic are least worst in a sense. Absolutely, no doubt about it. I think Celtic, they do have, because of the style of football, they're comfortable playing a more bunkered in. They're comfortable playing long ball. Celtic, I think we're hampered a little bit in our DNA as a club, and as I've said before, that we don't do that around here. But then, in Europe, you've got to adapt more and be more pragmatic, really. And our results show that we try and play expansive football, and we get punished more. So that's more. I think that's almost a cultural thing, if I dare say, around the two clubs, really, which is to our detriment. But also, I think when it comes to the Derby games, and again, and James may will blanch at this, but our players look very confident. They look like they believe they were going to win these games, and I don't believe that is the case. I mean, I think Tavernier's got the record. If you look across both Rangerses, Tavernier's lost more derbies than any other player in history. And they only had, I think, two players in that side who've ever won at Celtic Park. certainly in front of fans. So that starts to matter. When defeat racks upon defeat, it's kind of here we go again. You go 2-0 down again. Oh, here we go. I mean, is there that belief? How would Celtic have responded to going 2-0 down? I suspect it would have been, slightly more positive, not positive, but hopeful. I would say.
So let's talk about positive things because I feel like for a victory pod, there's been a little bit of negativity on the podcast today. Matt O'Reilly received the Young Player of the Year award at the club awards at the weekend, and well deserved, obviously. His goal in this derby game, James. I mean, like I think it might have been Hamish, tweeted that Celtic won back the ball, and within the 35 seconds between winning back the ball and Matt O'Reilly scoring that goal, they had 15 different passes, which is just shows you the difference in how Celtic
Yeah,
play in
that's right.
comparison to the way that they have played throughout the season. Like when Celtic move the ball at pace and do things the way that Brendan Rodgers wants them to do it, like they are a very good team, and that was a fantastic goal.
With the players capable of doing it, also in the positions that they should be playing, which was, also part of it. Yeah, I mean, he's been terrific, and you know, he spent a large chunk of the season with no functional midfielder on the other side, and I mean that from an attacking sense. Um, we spent literally months with the opposite eight, just not providing much in going forward. So yeah, I mean, with the increase in space, the increase in freedom, being able to get forward more. I mean, that's what Alan and I talked about with Tate's return, his ability to help him build up and transition, and whereas before, um, O'Reilly was having to drop deep at times in order to help in that regard. So he's been able to, um, be more available and forward up the pitch. So yeah, he's just terrific, and you know, he got there was some frustration with him early in his Celtic career because his finishing wasn't great. Some of that was bad luck, meaning that the keepers were doing a decent job against him for some as weird reason that there's just clustering of variants. Um, but yeah, it's I think he should have been player. I mean, I know why they try to spread these things out, but I mean, he should have been player of the season as well, given how important and voluminous. I mean, he's basically been fit the whole season, and played at a consistently high level. Not that there's not ebbs and flows; there always are with players, but yeah, just a brilliant season, and let's enjoy him for the last couple of games here because he's probably going to be. It'll probably be the end of his Celtic career.
Yeah, there's already rumors of offers coming in from the top six in the Premier League. Um, Not that we're trying to push him away, Alan, but like if he is going, and the reality of being Celtic is that when we have a player that plays to the level of Matt O'Reilly, we're going to lose him fairly soon. Um, we hate to put values on them, but like it's got to be somewhere in the 20 to 25 million. Like I this is where my frustration would be for Celtic because in the past they would have accepted an offer for like 12 million, and you're like, is that the best we can possibly do? But like he is a 20 million pound player at the very minimum.
Yeah, I would say that's the absolute minimum. To be honest with you, I think it will be higher. I think you'll see the Scottish transfer record broken quite easily when O'Reilly leaves. He's 23 years old. He's got 3 years left on his contract. He's had an incredible season. He's played virtually every minute. He's nearly at 20 goals and 20 assists. He had the most shots at the weekend. He created the most chances. He turns the ball over, turns the opposition over, well. He's just terrific. I mean, if he had any pace, he would be like a top player in a in an
Yeah, he'd be going
absolutely
for
top
80
team.
million if he
I
had
think he would
that.
just probably, yeah, yeah, absolutely. But he'll go to a significant and serious club for sure, and makes asset management sense for him to go this summer. He's 3 years left on his contract. His age, he's at peak. He is at peak selling uh, point this summer. And I know that sounds cold, and I know it sounds businesslike, and I'd love as a fan, I'd love another year of O'Reilly, but at that stage he'll be 24. He'll have 2 years left on his contract, and really, what is his development going to be in the next year, playing in the SPFL? So this is the time. This is the time, unfortunately, and we have to walk the walk as a club, and drive an absolutely hard bargain, to your point, and we have to reinvest wisely. That's really going to be where my eyes will be on, because I've got no doubt that he will leave this summer, and no doubt it will be a record fee. And what a player! I'll follow him keenly for the rest of his
Potentially
career.
will follow another former Celt in Ange Postecoglou, potentially going to Tottenham. Could be the move that he makes potentially. I mean, he just to follow up, James. He did actually win the Player of the Year as well. He won the treble, the personal treble. He won Player of the
I
Year,
thought I
Player of the
saw.
Year.
I saw Kyogo won Player of the Year. No.
No, I think it was he won Player of the Year, Player of the Year, and Young Player of the Year at the
Oh, okay.
Celtic
My
Awards.
bad
So
then.
Kyogo may have won the Fans Player of the Year. I'm not sure, but
Okay. All
yeah,
right. That's
I'm not.
probably what I'm
I'm not
thinking
totally
then.
sure on that, but yeah.
Yeah,
But
I'll be the annoying guy as usual here. I'd like
mhm.
to see him go to Spain or Italy. I think because of his um, you know, because he lacks that high gear and speed. I think the Premier League would be a tougher ask for him, um, because that it's just such a fast league. It plays at such a high rate, and that level of speed will be an issue. I think, or more of an issue. I mean, I think he could be a star in La Liga or in Italy. Whereas, I'm not saying he wouldn't be a good player in England in a top six, but I think it's going to be harder for him. Same with Bundesliga. I mean, the Bundesliga would probably be tougher too, just because it's little bit quicker. So just throw that in there.
Yeah,
I'm sure he'll take my career advice
I'm
under
sure he will.
advisement.
Yeah, I'm sure he will. He definitely listens to this podcast for sure.
Of course,
Um,
why wouldn't he?
yeah, exactly. Yeah. So like in terms of like moving forward, then I mean, by the time this podcast goes out, it's highly unlikely, but Rangers may drop points to Dundee again later this evening. So like the league could be over by the end of tonight. Um,
I think they're
and
playing their youth team. From what I saw that they have like three teams worth of senior players out tonight. I think is what I saw.
My fear is that they happen upon a functional midfield
Right.
by luck, because everyone's injured, and then they put Sterling, Diomande, and Silva, let's say, as a midfield three, and suddenly they look quite, or Raskin or something, and they suddenly look quite athletic and capable. That would be my fear. But no, I think Dundee. If you look at Dundee's results, I think they've
Yeah,
checked
I
out
think they're
pretty
on the
much. So
beach.
I'm
yeah,
not expecting. Yeah, I think
it's
it'll be a
very,
high
very,
score,
very
actually.
unlikely. But I'm just throwing that out there as a
It's possible.
potential if anybody
Mm.
wants to get into the celebratory mood very early. But there is one more of these to come, believe it or not, and that is the Scottish Cup final. Like what does this result and the league being wrapped up do going into a Scottish Cup final in terms of the preparation and even just psychologically? I really don't know how I'd feel if I was Rangers going into the Scottish Cup final in terms of like would I, and like you add in players like Lundstrom and the different players that are leaving at the end of the season. Like I genuinely don't know whether they're going to be either more fired up than ever or if they're going to be a little bit like lackluster, that defeated almost before going into it.
Yeah, I think this comes back to some of what Alan was talking about. This is where some of the qualitative stuff is important. Uh, is what does Clement decide to do? Does he realize that he's got some of these guys that are checked out, or at least moving in that direction? Um, and does he kind of fall back on the guys that are going to be around and they're going to give the effort and the intensity levels for what it's still a huge game and arguably bigger for them. I mean, obviously we'd prefer the double, but as we've been recanting over and over and over again, the league was the most important thing this season. Um, and uh, it's not technically done. So after we see today's result, or Tuesday's result against Dundee, I mean that'll be, to Alan's point, if that's a 7-0 to Rangers, I'm gonna, you know, be annoyed, and not because there's any real risk of anything. It's just going to be like, oh God, you got to be kidding me. And then if we lose to Kilmarnock, which wouldn't be crazy. I mean, again, it's shouldn't happen, but it wouldn't be crazy. Then all of a sudden you're like, oh God, I want to hang myself. But um, so yeah, who's available is going to be big, and which one of the guys, to Alan's point, if he could mistakenly fall into a midfield, which was the one I've been afraid of the whole time, which is Sterling next to Diamande. If he ever figured that out, it'd be like, oh geez, if the game would have started with Diamande man marking Hatate and Sterling man marking O'Reilly, it's a different game. I mean, it just is. It's we saw that with Bassi on Rogic. I mean, when you've got a fast, athletic guy man marking you, it makes for a tough afternoon a lot of the time. And so he could fall into that. I was worried he could fall into it for this game, and he continuously doesn't fall into it, which speaks to why I think we have the better manager. But um, yeah, so I think that qualitative stuff is hugely important for this game. But I would think, I mean, we're going to want to, I don't think we're going to let up. I mean, I think, particularly with it being Hart's last game, and some of these, probably O'Reilly's last game, and there's going to be a motivation on our side too. Um, so and that confidence issue. I mean, contrary to what I mean, when you do have a pattern of losing to a team, it absolutely becomes, if not an overt, it becomes a latent confidence issue. It nags in people's heads. Um, so I think anyone that's played sport, um, I'll share. I was on a men's baseball team as an adult, and we made the finals 10 years out of 11, and we lost 9 of them. So by the fifth or sixth one, you're like, what the fuck is going on here? Right? I mean, it's a human thing. It's so absolutely that is part of the mosaic here.
Yeah. I think it will depend on personnel. I mean, to be fair, if he as I say, if he locks onto a Diomande Sterling pivot with somebody who's not Lawrence and not
It
Cantwell
should
in
be
front of
Silva.
him,
The fact that he hasn't now come to that
then
3 is just crazy.
yeah, yeah. In fact, I mean, Silva would be a very good serviceable 10. And if I don't know if Sima and Matondo would be back. We know they're streaky, unpredictable players, but just the raw pace would change the dynamic of the match. And if they played Yilmaz instead of Barisic again, just because he's quicker, I think they would still have an issue at centre back. I don't see
Yep.
any good options for them at centre back. But but he could fall into that lineup for the cup final. I think that changes the dynamic somewhat, but it doesn't change. I think the Celtic team would be much what was there on at Saturday, and as James said, the belief would be there that they can win this game. If Beaton plays, then that might change it as well. Let's be honest, that could massively impact. A Beaton Aitken combination would be a tough double act up front to counter against. Um, but yeah, no, listen. I think as you say, as James says, and with Hart's last game, I think he's very much, I imagine, a kind of father figure around the squad. And if the players needed any extra motivation, it would that would all add to it, sort of thing. So, but the player, I think, whatever. One thing I have to say is that throughout the season, no matter how poor the performances and some very indifferent results, I've never sensed a wobble in the squad in terms of confidence, belief in what they're doing, the direction that they're going in, confidence in the manager, etc. Or there might well have been a couple of players that have been problematic in that regard, but you don't see them in the starting lineup so much. So I don't sense any issues there. It's where we've struggled is simply, as James says, an athleticism and quality gap compared to previous years. But my only slight concern out of Saturday was little Rio Hatate, because having watched the game back, he played like somebody who had something on his mind. I'm being flippant. I don't know if his cat had died or something like that. But, he looked like he was really. He was so off it. He was so far off his game. It was. I mean, there's only dear old Davis, their centre back, who had a -22 packing score. I mean, I just hope he's playing in the final. He was the only one that had a lower packing score than Hatate across the gang, and I'm including the substitutes. Right, it was that bad. So yeah, I just hope he's okay, because honestly, that was a worrying performance in terms of, and I mean that from a human level, not sort of oh, he was rubbish. I mean, players generally, when they play like that, it's because there's something happening that we don't know about, or something on their mind, and something at the human level that's maybe impacting them. Because that was such an off-it performance; it was incredible. But that was the
Mhm.
only kind of worry in my head. The rest, everyone else was kind of okay, or at least no worse than what they usually are.
Maybe it's because I'm a glass half full kind of person, but again, that to me actually gives me more positivity going into the final, because again, that's a level of player that if he steps up his game, Celtic have already won the game with him playing poorly. And it's been the same throughout the season against Rangers.
Yeah,
There have been individuals who are or better players who have played poorly in the derby, and yet Celtic have still won. So if we can get all of them to play well, or
yeah.
more of them to play well,
Oh, there were some bad
there
performances at the
were,
weekend. My
there were.
goodness.
Um,
Goodness me.
but
Well, maybe we don't get into
we'll
that
gloss
today.
over them slightly because of what the result means. And looking more generally, then there's look, we talked about dear old Philip Clement and what a defeat might mean to him. What a defeat in the Scottish Cup final might mean to him is him losing his job. Um, you can already see the media coverage slightly turning towards, Philip. It might not be the best idea if
Mm,
you lose this game. That might not be great for you personally. And what does a double do to
there's
Brendan
about 8 million
Rodgers?
reasons why
Because,
that might not happen.
well, yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
I'd be shocked. I'd be shocked even if they lose, even if we beat them 5-0 or something. Um I'd be surprised, just because the financial realities, and um you know the, we were talking offline before we came on. I mean, it's hard to know what Clement's vision of Rangers are, because he did come in intra-season, and he inherited the squad, and for the most part, um, they were somewhat limited in the January window for a variety of reasons, and then Cortez goes out hurt right away, who was kind of the outside of Silva, the big signing. So it's kind of hard to know what his vision is, and I'm trying to be fair to him, and be charitable. So yeah, I'd be surprised with that. But it's they're going to go through a massive overhaul, and that I put out a thread uh, yesterday on the persistent overvaluation of the importance of managers as coaches, relative to recruitment and things like wage bills and that kind of thing. So, um, that he's going to have the opportunity to rebuild the squad. I mean, they're going to have a huge outflow in wage bill. Now they might have a limitation on fees and that kind of thing, as far as being able to pay agents fees and transfer fees and that kind of thing. But they're going to have plenty of room on a wage bill perspective to reshape the squad. So yeah, it's and we're going to God, I hope we're going to go through a significant overhaul over the summer, in Rogers' vision. So yeah, it'll be a nice kind of pin, put it in the grand scheme of things. I don't think the cup final matters that much. I mean, obviously it matters a ton, uh, but I'm talking strategically, as far as like what direction are the two clubs going in. I'd be shocked if it has any kind of major impact or even minor impact, in that regard.
Well, my question was actually going to be
Yeah.
about Brendan
I
Rodgers,
was,
not Clement. It was
oh,
going to
I'm
be,
sorry.
what does a double win do for Brendan Rodgers, because I mean, like it was a risk taking him back. It was split the fan base pretty much, not straight down the middle, but at least 60-40 down the middle in terms of people who wanted him back and people who weren't happy. And as soon as the results went poorly, or it really had the potential to turn sour. So, like a double win, Champions League football again, Alan. I mean, in terms of even just the power struggle that we've seen little glimpses of within the club, like it goes a long way to giving Brendan Rodgers a little bit more freedom in the summer.
Yeah, I mean it's psychologically. I mean, obviously, if we lose that game, we don't just lose one cup. We lose two because the Sky TV will award the bragging rights cup to them as well. So we actually lose two trophies for the price of one. So that'll be a bit sad. Psychologically, hugely important. Strategically, as James says, in terms of the direction of the two clubs, almost irrelevant. It's all about winning the league. It really is. And actually, if they go into the summer thinking they've won a cup and some of those players aren't as bad as we thought they were 2 weeks ago, then happy days. And for Celtic, it might focus minds on actually we've got a ton of players we need to shift out, and then we need to start supporting the manager with our new revamped recruitment setup. So that none of that is going to change, and we're going to have plenty of margin for error in our dealings. They are whether they win the Scottish Cup or not, they are going to have very very little margin for error in terms of their recruitment. They've already committed 4.5 million to buy Diamande, another 2 to 3 million on Cortez. That I can't imagine they've got much more than 7 million to play with in terms of a transfer kitty. They're not going to get much money for players that are already there, despite the sort of 20 odd million for Butland that some of them think they're going to get. Um, it's just fantasy. Um, so Celtic will there'll be a bit of goodwill, I think, lost if Celtic lose the cup final. But strategically, this is a hugely important summer for Brendan Rodgers to shape the squad that he wants. The resources have to be there. They will be. They must be there. I mean, it's unfeasible to think they won't be there for him to do that. I think it will more come down. Any sort of hesitancy will be more down to we can't just carry 40 players. You've got to get at least anywhere between 10 and 15 players need to be off the wage bill. We'll probably lose not just O'Reilly, but we might lose one or two others as well. You never know. Unexpected, like Jota was. So all that comes into it. So yeah, psychologically, yes, but strategically and how it changes the landscape, it's the league. It's all about the league. It's all about the league and what that means for the next 5 to 10 years, I would
I
say.
suspect that Kwan won't get his move to Bayern Munich or Real Madrid based on his season for Celtic this season. It's just an
N-
inkling.
n- Not yet. He still has some more development to go.
Well, no, they'll go for They'll go for Cantwell instead. Why would you buy Corn when you
I
can
have to
buy
say
Cantwell?
I hadn't seen the rumors about Butland, but I do see a headline now: £25 million. Clement ensures Premier League sides must dig deep for Rangers goalkeeper. I mean, he's 31 years old. He's not getting that big money move to a Premier League club. I'm sorry, Mr. Clement, but
The irony is, of all the players they bought over the last 2 years, many of whom have got really bad injury histories. His was probably the worst, and he's the one that hasn't got injured. So just be careful. Listen, as I say, listen, this extensive stats bomb goalkeeping metrics. Butland is about in the middle with Joe Hart of goalkeepers in this league. I'm sorry, I know that doesn't fit the public narrative, but it's just the reality of the
so
data.
anything else before we wrap up this victory lap of a podcast? It's not quite the victory lap yet. We'll say if we're in a 1,500-meter race, we're
Yeah, I'm not having
still into the
it.
second lap yet. We haven't the bell hasn't rung yet.
No, I mean it's just the we're still in a situation where the um it's glorious that we got to this point. I mean, it really is. I mean, as we've been saying for months now, literally months now, just get there. Who cares? Like the water's under the bridge. The cake's been baked as far as the transfer windows, that kind of stuff. And I think everyone in the squad, the coaching staff, the support. Like there has been a kind of a unified effort to get to this point, and the fact that we've actually done it, regardless of how and the details, and you know, us two assholes talking about issues and picking apart certain things, which is what we do. Uh, we're here, right? And to get to this point has been a colossal effort, I think, and should be celebrated, even analytically speaking. But none of that's going to stop us from pissing and moaning about going forward and future plans and all the stuff that we need to, so that we don't get humiliated in Champions League next season and all these other things. Um, but yeah, I mean, it really is a time to rejoice and celebrate. And with, again, only because we're an analytics focused pod, it's not officially done, so there's still a fraction of an issue here. So
Mhm.
we'll hopefully get a lot more comfortable in the next 36 hours.
Well, I was going to say my analogy wasn't
Yeah,
exactly perfect there. If this was a 1500 meter race, the bell has rung. We are miles ahead. We just need to get to the finish line. But we could still
We, we
stumble.
have we have to not
difficult to trip over our
break our
laces.
femur in the
Yeah,
last 100 yards.
exactly. Yeah.
Uh, Yeah, I think you're starting to see even at the weekend there. You're starting to see what happens at the end of the season. Some
Yep.
odd results like Hibs nil, Aberdeen 4, Ross County 1, Motherwell 5, all that. Because yeah, and that's why I'm kind of actually quite hopeful about tomorrow night. Even I know we've performed really poorly against Kilmarnock, and a lot of that's down credit to them for stopping us playing, obviously. But they've achieved what they set out to achieve. I think they've got Conference League football, guaranteed
I think they
league football,
I think they
which
have a
is
shot at
fantastic
Europa
for them.
League, actually. I don't know. I
Have they?
maybe that's just Hearts.
They're
Yep.
not going to go. They're not going to go up. Yeah, they're not going to go
Yep.
up. They're not going to go down. Right? They can't change their position. I, clubs like St Mirren, Kilmarnock, they tend to have players on shorter contracts. So as we come to the end of the season, they've probably got far more players who are wondering what's going to happen next year, etc. All of that, and to be honest with you, Kilmarnock at their absolute best, the best of Kilmarnock, which I think we've come up against this season, are a really really tough team to play. Kilmarnock, there's maybe 2 or 3% off it because they've achieved what they want to achieve mentally, etc. And the same with St Mirren at the weekend. I just think with Celtic the way as focused and as together as they are at the moment, I just think that fact that Kilmarnock have achieved their goal, they've no more to achieve really this season. I think that's enough. I think just to give us that little edge tomorrow night.
And hopefully by the end of the week, isn't it, that Celtic will be crown champions? Am I right in that?
Officially.
Yeah.
Yep.
Oh, it's definitely to be celebrated. It would have been if we don't win the league, it would be miserable. Believe me, it would be utterly, utterly. So yeah, to go into the summer knowing you've got that Champions League campaign to come, thinking about how that rebuild is going to take shape. These are really exciting. We will piss and moan. We will complain. We will point out all the risks, but also to be
Mm.
enjoyed and
Yeah,
I
and
just
savoured.
as seminal as the 10 in a row season was and would have been had we won it, this is actually strategically, I would argue, way more
Way more
important.
important.
Like
Yeah,
that, this
way
this
more
is this season is
important.
potentially the one that could endow, as Alan and I have been talking about, the Bayern Munich Dortmund situation, where you have, a financial gap that's systemic and really unassailable. There's no scenario in which Dortmund
Yeah,
is
it's,
going
it's,
to
it is.
catch up to Bayern Munich financially. They might win a league here and there on occasion, and obviously Leverkusen's been an aberration this season, a glorious one. I mean, just brilliant, but not structurally sustainable. And that's we have the opportunity to do that now. I mean, that's all we could ask for strategically. So yeah, that would have been completely different had we
Mhm.
blown this league.
Yeah, and we're yet to see next season whether or not the new Champions League format is either way worse for Celtic or way better for Celtic. It may actually benefit Celtic depending on how things go. We just don't know.
You play a weaker team. You're gonna, well, it's going to depend on the draw. I mean, you could play Aston Villa in pot four, for example, which would be really tricky. Or you could play like a Croatian team and a
Yeah.
Greek team or something. You know what I mean? And play have two matches like that. So the potential is there for more competitive games, but there's also a risk of actually having like 8 really really hard games.
And the practical reality is that and it's the was it the Scotland coefficient account on Twitter that says does such a brilliant job of, and Marasovic on the Celtic account um, uh, tracks it from a Celtic specific perspective, but from a Scotland perspective, the coefficient is almost built in to drop. So the likelihood of us having to go back into qualifiers, not next season but the following, is almost assured. And very quickly,
Yeah,
unless
it
all
is.
of a sudden both Rangers and Celtics start doing better in Europe the next couple of seasons, that could be multiple qualifying rounds very quickly. Um, so that's why it's while this has been seminal from getting at least 1, maybe 2 years of that gravy train of maybe 50 million in Champions League money, it still needs to be used smartly to endow the pipeline of talent and player trading. And because the practical reality is we might end up as a Europa League team, um, just based off of the structural issues and how they're crafting this new Champions League format. Um, kind of on a 5 to 10 year basis, kind of strategically. That probably is going to be where we settle realistically. So that the next 2, 3 seasons are hugely important in order to kind of set things in place in order to deal with that likelihood. And
Yeah.
fans don't want to hear that because they don't want to hear that we're running on a Europa League budget baseline, which again has been somewhat reasonable. And not to say that the excess cash hasn't gotten to ridiculous levels, but um, that's still lingering in the background.
But if financial sustainability regulations force you to do that, because your 70% ratio of wages to football income, you can't flick a switch and go, well, this year that it's 70% of a Champions League budget, and then next year it's 70% of a Europa League budget. You can't run the business like that. Now that disadvantages them across the city more than it does us, because historically they've always overstretched and always overreached, whereas we've tended to,
Closer to
post
60. Yep.
Martin O'Neill, we've tended to go on a conservative basis, and actually that's the right way to go. But it does mean that you might think, oh, we're in the Champions League, we'll get better players. Well,
Ish. That's
ish,
right.
it could, because we have to hit 70%. We have to hit 70% every single year.
The problem is that we take,
But we are starting with
yeah.
15 million more every
Um,
year, so
the problem is that
that
we
helps.
take tax into account, whereas, as we know, that's not a problem that they have to deal with. So, um,
Well, again, FSR regulations. Another pillar of it is that the monitoring's done by UEFA. It's not done by the brothers in the Scottish Football Association waving things through with their eyes closed, right? So the potential to have shenanigans going on in the background are much reduced, because it's UEFA accountants that are scrutinising it.
I think that's a
Happy
conversation
days.
for later on in the summer, and maybe within like the first minute and a half to 2 minutes after Celtic are crowned champions to lift the trophy, we can start talking about structural changes and
And we talk
the
about
the fact that
immortalisation after
our,
that.
our squad's not
Yes.
up to scratch and start to panic ahead of the next season. Give it a 60 seconds to a minute, or 60 seconds to 2 minutes maybe. See how it
Yeah.
goes.
At
Yeah.
most. At most.
Yeah. You wait. Who'll be laughing when it's Scales and Taylor lining up against Real Madrid on the first day of Champions League?
Right, that's where we will
Anyway.
park the pod for this week. We'll be hopefully talking about Celtic being champions on next week's podcast. Should we not trip at the final hurdle or trip on our laces in the final 100 yards of the race? So, yeah, I mean, what a season it's been. It's been an absolute roller coaster ride. So, hopefully by next week it'll be all over and we'll be talking about the Scottish Cup as well. Until then, thanks for listening this week and we'll chat to you then.